Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, the sad reality is in this day and age that to get something really meaningful done in terms of when it comes to the climate crisis that we're in the middle of in our planet, it comes down to so much more than just the science. It really comes down to having people in positions where they can do something, who have the mettle to push and actually get, well, let's just say it, get shit done. And you know, if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. So if you are, please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us the old 5-star rating, and subscribe to the podcast. We would really absolutely appreciate it. We're pretty much everywhere on all providers like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. Plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to find us on social media. We're on the Facebook. We're on the Twitter. We're on the Instagram, and we're also on the TikTok, and we're on the Letterboxd for all sorts of fun stuff and updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because, you know, if we love to write about it and watch it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got a real interesting one. It is in theaters now for our neighbors to the south, and it is a documentary called "To the End," and it's about the fight for getting real climate change going in the U.S. and it follows four different subjects, one of whom is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Who also had the documentary about her knock down the house. And it really is it's an interesting film that looks at how much courage you really need to get stuff done in politics, and the realities of the fact that, especially when it comes to climate change, the clock is ticking, and it follows these four women over 3 years. They're very turbulent ones, full of crisis. And these four women, they're fighting for the Green New Deal. I mean, it's basically the story of the Green New Deal and pushing to get a real historic shift in climate politics in the United States. It's a fascinating doc, and just it's a little scary too. I mean, not just for the science part of it, but just for sort of the realities of how hard it is to actually get something done in politics. But it is from writer-director Rachel Lears, who did do the film Knock Down the House. So there is a bit of a thread there. And we had the unique pleasure of sitting down talking with Rachel about sort of the origins of the story and why she wanted to tell this story and how she shoots and just really all the issues that come up, because it's a complex and really engaging film, which I can't wait for more and more people to see. Like I said, for our neighbors to the south in the States, it is in theaters now. It's called To the End. But before you check that out, check out our talk with Rachel, because between you and me, it's a pretty good one. Thank you so much for the time today. And I mean, and really congratulations on the film. I thought it was great.
Thanks so much.
Now, I guess my first question is, like, I guess walk me through the origin of wanting to make this film. Because, I mean, I could say that this was a sequel to Knock Down the House, but that feels a bit simplistic. But I've got to imagine some of that was born out of that experience as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the film did grow out of our work on Knock Down the House. In the fall of 2018, we were doing post for Knock Down the House, and that was the time when the UN IPCC report came out, which said, I think, something along the lines of, we need rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society to avoid the worst effects of the climate crisis, and those have to happen within the next 12 years, at the time 12 years, by 2030. So that really lit a fire under the climate movement and the conversation about climate. And it really galvanized me to think that I wanted to do something related to climate issues for my next film. So I began, I was already, speaking with Ocasio-Cortez about the possibility of working on a future project. And that idea quickly coalesced around her, as well as the three other protagonists of the film, who are all key players behind the Green New Deal, which is an ambitious solution to the climate crisis that proposes to do exactly what the scientists are saying and really enact those rapid and far-reaching changes, and to do so in a way that makes racial and economic justice part of the solution.
For sure.
So that was this big idea that kind of exploded into the national conversation in the fall of 2018, when the Sunrise Movement occupied Nancy Pelosi's office, and Ocasio-Cortez, then representative-elect, came to visit, and the project really took off from there. So it did overlap a bit with the rollout of Knock Down the House, and in 2019 we were working on both.
Perfect. Now, I mean, something I think go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so this is, it's a different story, of course, but it does sort of continue on with some of the same themes of exploring what it takes to make politically impossible things possible, and the courage of believing that systemic change is possible, and taking that step of devoting your life to being part of it.
No, and I mean, it is something that requires devotion, because I mean, I think something that I really appreciated about the film, I mean, especially with your subjects, is just sort of the amount of pushback that they get from the halls of, like, the amount of work that gets put in to do nothing, sort of in the halls of power, felt incredibly shocking. I don't know why, but I mean, actually seeing that frustration made it very sort of real and very visceral to me. And I mean, for you, how did you feel sort of being, I mean, I guess embedded with your subjects, but I mean, that's probably the wrong word, but how important was it for you to sort of understand not just sort of the boots on the ground need and sort of the frustration, but also really the dedication to push forward in the face of all that frustration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that on a character level, that was really the core of it, of just looking at what it's like for a movement to have 1 foot, maybe a few feet inside the doors of the halls of power. What's that going to look like? That was sort of one of the initial, jumping off places for the film. What's it like to have more power than you ever imagined having before, but not enough to fully set the agenda or to fully achieve all your goals? And what that looks like is a frustrating process, but a very dramatic one of a lot of ups and downs. And in the end, they, with the perspective of 4 years now, I mean, the most up-to-date footage is almost 4 years after the earliest footage in the film. It really shows that a sea change has taken place
For sure.
around these issues in the United States. And they really did succeed in changing not just the national conversation, but also shifting the window of what was politically possible, so that we do have major climate policy for the first time in U.S. history now. So we were really interested in that. And I think as a filmmaker too, when we started out, there was this sort of sense that the characters were encountering dystopia on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Right? The climate crisis itself, the disasters. Yeah, and the media, the sort of hall of mirrors of media and politics, and also the Kafkaesque world of Washington, D.C. politics. So Ocasio-Cortez describes it as a maze, as she's learning to navigate Washington, D.C. and the way the process works, the way the sausage is made, the way all of the different forces struggle for power and jockey for position. The metaphor she comes up with is a maze. There's a lot of dead ends, and you waste your time and energy. But in the end, what's extremely satisfying, both for me as a filmmaker and so far, and for audiences as well, is to see them really, they do find a way out of the maze. So we're thrilled that can be part of the story too. But along the way, it helps you appreciate the tenacity of what it takes to make change in this way.
I mean, for you, how important is it? I mean, especially on a film like this, I mean, definitely have the camera sort of, I mean, I don't want to say on your shoulder because the rigs aren't necessarily that big anymore, but to sort of have boots on the ground and sort of be experiencing a lot of these things in the moment, because I mean, it does feel like the kind of film that you're not going to appreciate sort of the immediacy of it as a storyteller unless you're there to sort of witness it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been making films in a sort of verite observational combined with intimate interviews style for developing that style for over a decade now, and so I do a lot of the shooting myself. I didn't do all of it for this film, partly because of the pandemic and partly
For
because
sure.
of just the
Right.
schedule. And I think it was maybe 11 states. I don't have the number in front. I think it was 11 states plus Washington. So it was the story took place all over the place. And in some cases, we found someone local or sent someone else besides me to cover it just logistically. But it's I really appreciate the intimacy and uh, just raw emotion that verite filmmaking captures. And that's just really at the core of what really uh, keeps me going as a filmmaker and what initially drew me to the art form. And I think one of the big challenges with this project was uh, it trying to make cinema in the conditions of journalism.
Right.
So, and some in Washington D.C. on Capitol Hill, post pandemic and post January 6th, there were so many restrictions on where you could go and where you could film, and we had to work within all of those. I talked to a BBC reporter at an event the other day. She saw the film, and it was she was very curious about the specific rig that I used to like get shots of the Capitol that make it look a little different from the way it usually looks in the news coverage. So that's what we were trying to do, and really take those limitations, which are part of the nature of verite documentary filmmaking, and still within that create something that that feels like cinema and that takes you on a journey that goes beyond the short term that most journalism does. So, with this 4-year time frame, you can really see what long form documentary, offers in terms of nuance. Long form documentary just allows a space of nuance and depth in exploring some of these issues, and being there on the ground while it's being made is a huge part of that.
Well, I mean, it allows for time too, as well, because I mean, you need to be able to engender a certain degree of trust with your subjects. It's not a question of you just going in and sticking a camera in someone's face and getting facts. I mean, there is really something that you did with this film that really walks the line right between sort of cinema and journalism and makes us care about these people. And I mean, I'm curious for you, how do you ultimately engender trust? I mean, particularly with these three women who are not AOC. Like, you can't necessarily just go in and, well, like, she's vouching for me, so let's talk. You need to go more than that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I mean, that's such a huge part of my documentary practice, and just the art form of documentary is, and it's something that's it's this very unique and in some ways strange kind of social process where you get to know someone, and in that process kind of try to convince them to let you record their life uh, for a film. And it requires, so at the beginning of this process, I did know uh, AOC already. I also had known Alexandra Rojas, um, the head of Justice Democrats, for several years, because she'd been involved in the making of Knock Down the House as well. And of course, having them vouch for me did help bring Varshini Prakash and Rhiana Gunn-Wright, the other two main protagonists, on board. But of course, it's a process of earning and maintaining that trust, even if they'll give you a chance. And I find that there's just a lot of it's just a constant conversation and negotiation between. I'm always putting out ideas about things I'd like to film, and almost all of them they say know, but you have to keep
It's the
thinking
ones that say
creatively
yes.
about
Yeah.
what's going to work. Right. The ones that you don't need to film everything in order to make a documentary. I mean, I think we had maybe 275 hours of footage for this one, which is a lot, but it's not, the most that any documentary's ever had. And, so I think I tend to, I do notice when I'm covering people who are public figures, and there is a lot of other press around that, especially in the early stages. I have to really spend a lot of time kind of getting to know them and explaining that what I'm doing is not the same thing as ordinary journalism. That yes, we'll have the fact checking rigor of journalism, but we're not going to just take off after one shoot. That we need them to be able to go deeper than they would ordinarily go with journalists. And some people are willing to do that right away, and some people, kind of takes a while to get to that point. But that's very much a core part of the process of
No,
making documentary
no,
for
and I
me.
mean, I agree with you on that because I mean, it makes me think of just, I mean, especially on an issue like climate change, because I mean, you could spout the science and the facts and sort of give all this irrefutable, scientific proof, but if you're not presenting it in such an engaging way that makes it personal, like audiences will just glaze over. And I mean, I'm kind of curious for you as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, trying to get these real issues out there. How important do you think it is to make sure that at least we get some degree of personal connection to these issues, because it makes, like, at least from my perspective, it makes it that much more relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge part of um, what the initial concept for this film is, and what I think, really the jumping off place for any film about climate should be. And there's lots of ways in. It doesn't. This film doesn't go too in depth with people that are experiencing firsthand the most devastating effects of the crisis, but by looking at the experiences of young people, younger, they were all under 30 when we started the project. Um, uh, that was a moment when younger people, millennials and Gen Z, were beginning to define themselves as a really particular uh, frontline community in the climate crisis, because they're going to have to live through more of the worst of it than older generations. So, now it's just sort of common. Everybody knows that there's a youth climate movement, but when we started this project, it was sort of just beginning to really take shape. And those personal stories it's the style of film that I'm interested in making. It's the style of film that I'm interested in watching. So, that's just sort of where I come from out of it. I've never made a topical film, and I'm not, maybe I'd consider it, but for this, I didn't want to do that. Really wanted to just get into construct cinematically the POV of these characters as they go about their work, which is the work of imagining solutions to the climate crisis. I didn't want to make a film that was about convincing people that the crisis was real, because that was far and away the scientific consensus,
For sure,
even back
yeah.
in 2018 when we started. And, that's not really the conversation. I wanted to be starting a conversation about, like, okay, now that we all know this is going on, like, what do we do about it? How do we begin to imagine acting on the scale that the scientists say is necessary? And these were people who were going about that strategically. They were brave in that process. They were, they had to have a lot of guts to do what they were doing, challenge a lot of really powerful interests along the way, who push back in very powerful ways. And in the end, they don't, the protagonists don't get everything they want, but they push hard enough, and they're able to do it strategically enough that it really does actually, it is tremendous what they're able to accomplish. And that personal side of that, to me, is what's powerful. It's like when you think about, oh, this crisis is so big, I can't even get my mind around it. How on earth could I act to do anything about it? We wanted to make a film that would kind of shift the idea of climate action from actions around consumer choice, which, that's fine if you want to do that, and that's part of it, but that's not going to get us the scale we need. So the most significant thing that an individual can do is join collectively in a movement to change that history. And that's what these folks are doing, and that's what the film shows, up close and personal, what that's like, both on the day-to-day level and in the sort of long view over several years.
No, I agree with you on that 100%. And I mean, even like when I look at you as a filmmaker, I mean, and I see films like this, I've got to imagine it takes a certain degree of bravery, even on your part, to sort of jump into something like this, because I mean, obviously you don't know where the narrative is going. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, was there a point in the process as you were, talking to people and making, getting it all together, like, was there a point when you knew you had a film? Because I mean, I can imagine, especially sort of early on, you're kind of flying without a net.
Yeah, and anytime you're making a verite film, there is a process of just gaming out possible narratives that might happen. You've got to do that for your pitches and your grant applications, and
Well,
just
for
even
sure, yeah.
for yourself. And in thinking through what is this about? Maybe I have a character and an issue, but what is this story going to look like? So you try to learn as much as you can about what these types of stories could look like, and talk to the people involved about what they think might happen, and what they hope will happen. And for this film, we really went from, there's several kind of inflection points. And when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, we had one production schedule and one storyline kind of mapped out through the end of that year. And it soon became clear that was going to have to go out the window, and we'd have to really, go a little bit back to the drawing board to see where the story would go. And at that point, the election of 2020 was sort of a linchpin moment that we had maybe 7 or 8 possible endings that we were envisioning in 20. We spent some of that time when we couldn't do a lot of shooting, really doing the story development and thinking through, well, where are the different places this story could go? And thankfully, over the course of all of these years, it went to the place of something actually getting passed. But it was very touch and go, as you know, if you followed this story in the news.
Yeah.
Of course, when the film premiered at Sundance, there wasn't it wasn't clear whether climate policy would be passing, and so we spent a few months not completely sure if that would be the outcome. And of course, when the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, did pass in August, we knew it was a fantastic opportunity to re-edit, and we were and reshoot some material, and we were very happy that it worked just barely for our production schedule. I mean, I think we delivered at the end of September for a December 9th release date, which was a little hectic, but I think that's that is the joy and the challenge of verite filmmaking, is that you never quite know where it's going to go, but all along the way you're envisioning, how do I tell this story either way? How do I tell this story in any of these 7 outcomes? And then when it gets down to 2, it's like, well, I hope it's this one, but I have to have a backup plan. And these are it just, through that process, you end up coming up with the kernels of wisdom from your protagonists, and they're the most the experiences that you've captured that are the most compelling to viewers, and that really becomes the core of the film, even as you might be waiting for things to happen in that process.
But I mean, at the same time, does that make it harder to let go of a project? Because I mean, obviously in something like verite, doing a verite documentary, like if something happens on one variation, then that opens up other possibilities, and then if something else happens, that opens other possibilities. Like, how do you consciously, as a filmmaker, like, how do you let the story go? I mean, that's something I'm always kind of fascinated by, because I mean, you obviously can't make a perpetual movie forever. You have to sort of lock picture and cut and then get it out there at some point. But how do you know
Totally.
when that moment is to sort of let it go?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that moment is dictated by the realities of your distribution timeline.
Right.
We had to lock picture and do post 3 times for this film, which I hope to never do again, and I don't recommend. But we weren't going to wait indefinitely for something to happen. I think you know, we were hopeful. We knew that there was a possibility that something would pass this year. Of course, when we started, not when we started the project, but when back in 2021, when we submitted to Sundance and began, moving towards our first our first final cut. Everyone in Washington, D.C. thought that the legislation would pass by the end of that year. So it was a very reasonable decision to make to look towards the January 22 premiere date. So there's certain external factors that sort of make you choose. I am very much of the school that of thought that works of art are never finished, but only abandoned. You have to call it done at some point, and I don't really have too much trouble with that. There's always like little things that maybe I could change, but it's not. I don't know. It's not that letting go of it per se isn't the thing that I struggle with the most. I do think it's hard to know what the right moment is, and for this one, by the time it happened, we knew that was the ending because that was the ending we'd been hoping for and planning for quite a while already. So, the story was very much constructed around that. So it's very, very dependent on the project and the story of what constitutes the ending. But I will say that you sort of know it when you see it, and that there were kind of different moments throughout the shooting and editing process where it just sort of felt like, oh, that line, that's the sentiment that we need to end on, or that scene needs to be pretty close to the end of the movie because that's what we want to leave people with. So there's a intuitive sense of it as well as kind of just wrestling with the external realities of the timelines that you have.
Exactly. Now, I mean, just to put a bow on this, and I mean, I think this is something you did with your film really quite well, is just that documentary allows for a certain degree of freedom to tell very dynamic and very engaging stories in whatever way it pleases. And I mean, I'm just curious for you as a filmmaker, what is it about the documentary form that draws you in, that makes you want to tell stories in this fashion?
Oh, wow. Thanks for asking that. I mean, I really fell in love with documentary um, a little later in my life than a lot of filmmakers. I was in my mid-20s. I had a background in music and photography, and I was studying anthropology and ethnomusicology in a doctoral program at NYU. And when I discovered documentary, it really struck me as, I think the collage aspect of the form really appealed to me, that, you're working with, in the production process, you're engaging with real people in real life in the contemporary world. And that was always something that interested me. I mean, I was studying anthropology and interested in, and to me, just to be clear, contemporary anthropology is very much a humanities discipline of engaging with politics, culture, and just the contours of human life and society in different contexts. It's not, it has a colonial history, but it doesn't necessarily, it also has a fantastic history of self-questioning, of really interrogating the power relationships inherent in that discipline. So that really gave me a grounding in the sense of in the ethics of trust building that we discussed earlier, and in that being just really a core part of the practice of documentary. So I was interested in that. I was interested in that sort of social process. Like, this is not a type of art form that's going to keep me alone in my studio or my room. It's going to be a very interactive process with really interesting people, both colleagues and the film participants. And and then in the editing process, it's this incredible montage collage process where you're putting together an audiovisual fabric that includes language and text and images, of course, and the flow of moving images. I think about as almost like an improvisatory flow of when you're shooting, it's like playing improvisational music. You have to be attuned to what's happening in the room with you, and listening as much as you are seeking compositions that are going to look like good shots on the fly when you don't always have the time or the space to set up the exact shot you want. You still have to
Right.
get a good one.
Right.
So that sort of those limitations really appealed to me. And then when you get into the editing room, it's like you deal with the footage that you shot, and usually there's something you wish you got that you hadn't, but you still have to deal with it. And you can bring in anything. You bring in music, you bring in photos, you bring in archival footage. It's just that openness of form to materials of all kinds. It kind of really energized me as an artist in it to be able to create an audio-visual story out of all of those materials. So I think, really coming from my background in music and photography, as well as anthropology, it really just felt like an aha moment for me. And I was instantly like, oh, this is definitely what I'm going to do with my life. And so
Well,
almost 20 years later,
I love
still
that.
doing it.
I mean, I love that. And I mean, I think what you've done here with this film, I mean, it's really a fantastic piece of work because, I mean, at the end of the day, what art is supposed to do is engage people and get them talking. And I mean, especially around an issue like this, which is so important. The reality is we can never stop talking about climate change because we have to. And I mean, when we see it on
Yeah,
such a personal
thank you.
level, it makes us understand that. And I mean, again, I think this is a fantastic film, and I'm so looking forward to for more and more people to get to see it. But again, congrats on the work, and thank you so much for the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.